Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today we're going to be talking about Tiamat, specifically how Larva Tiamat might be coming to mobile. What her kit is going to be like, I think, is going to be something of great interest. And this is something where you can look at how she is on arcade, but keep in mind that not everything on arcade is going to function well in actual FGO mobile. So this is something I really wanted to cover with you guys, and I think it's a great video topic for that reason. So again, not going to get into anything about the story of arcade or anything like that. I'm just going to say that all of this is going to be conjecture, and that again, it certainly may be wrong. So just keep that in mind, but I'm going to give it my best stab at what I think they're going to do. So again, obviously we've got Larva Tiamat here, and this is her arcade deck here. And you guys can actually see that they do end up giving her double Buster, double Arts, and a single Quick card. A lot of arcades systems are very similar to mobile, so there's not too much of difference there. Most of the differences are in the actual flow of how combat works. Things have cast times and sort of a lot longer time-based cooldowns rather than turn-based cooldowns. So things work in a little bit of a different manner, but some of the main staples are actually the same. And again, I do think this is interesting. I think at least having the two Buster cards works out for her, because on again arcade, her Noble Phantasm is an AoE Buster Noble Phantasm, which is intriguing in and of itself. So that does give you the triple Buster deck sort of to be able to be formed there, as well as still having two Arts cards for Noble Phantasm generation to help her out. I think if you look through her skills here, you're going to notice something pretty interesting. So you guys can actually see that she has the chance to seal all enemies' critical attacks for 30 seconds. I get the feeling that in FGO, this would translate into critical attack chance resistance, or just crit down on the enemy, whichever one they want to do. But I don't think you'll have the ability to necessarily seal the enemy's crit chance so that they cannot crit no matter what. That may be a new mechanic, though, that they would add, but if they did add this, it would be new. There isn't really anything else like that in the game at the current moment. And then similarly here, you also have heal block for 30 seconds, which again prevents any healing on arcade. In FGO, this would be basically the heal reductions and stuff like that that you sometimes see bosses applying. I hope they don't give her this, not because it would be like so broken or anything like that, but rather it's one of the like weakest things I think that you could give to a player. Really just in general, yes, it's nice sometimes to be able to deprive the enemy of some of its insane healing, but a lot of the healing that enemies will do is somewhere in the realm of like tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, and a lot of it depends on the fight that you're in. So unless this is a percentile modifier, I really don't see it being that good for her. And so I would prefer that they did something else. But it just depends, because I'm going to kind of try to show you guys the theme of her kit here. So as we look at the second skill here, you guys can also see she has a chance to stun all enemies for 4 seconds, and then a chance to inflict curse every 10 seconds for 3 times to them. So again, don't pay too much attention to the durations for anything like that, but this is an interesting thing, because this reminds me a lot of, say, something like a terror type of skill where it's functioning on a per turn basis. It has the chance to stun or debilitate in some way. So I could see something like that being sort of the replacement here in this skill. And if you think about it with regards to Tiamat especially, that makes a lot of sense that she would have something like that. So I think giving her some sort of terror here would work in that regard. And then as we get to the third skill here, you have a party heal of, again, up to 1500 on arcade. That's not that crazy. You can see that come in as is, but I would honestly just be frank with you guys and say that's actually rather weak if that's all it really does. So I'm going to hope, especially for an SSR that we know is coming, that will probably be limited, that this skill would be a little bit more robust than that, especially when you start considering some of her competition here is going to be units like Kiara that can heal themselves for quite a bit. So, but this would be party-wide, at least in that regard, unlike Kiara, so that would be a nice thing. And then similarly here, you've also got the ability to charge the party's MP gauge by 5%. I'm going to be brutally honest here and say that 5% is just trash, and that if they were to bring her in with just 5%, that would be bad, assuming no other changes. So I'm going to hope that at minimum this is a 10% charge, but I think they could go even more robust with this, and we might actually see, maybe one of our more first like support-minded alter egos, really. Not quite support, but rather that you might actually see her having the ability to give maybe 10, 20, or heck, even 30% charge, which would be very intriguing. Now, again, though, coupled with the heal, they may sort of temper this some. They may try to keep it relatively, like, mundane, but it just depends. And the real thing I'm trying to show you here is that across kind of all their stuff, other than the third skill, which is pretty party-focused, and sort of her survival there, I think you have the first and second skill kind of being very debilitative, very crowd control-ish. And that's something where I think that we might actually see Tiamat, as she's implemented in mobile here, being a little bit more of a challenge unit in that sense. Expect more stuff like this. It may not come in these exact ways. Like I said, they could bring in something like heal block. They could bring in something like critical attack. But those would be probably relatively newer types of mechanics if they did. And so I would expect them to instead replace it with somewhat of an analog that we have here in mobile, as well as maybe beef it up some, maybe add some additional effects. You might see some additional steroids, because honestly, that is one of the things that is just sheerly lacking in her kit here. And you don't see a whole lot of, steroids really in arcade. And so that's something where I'm not surprised, but I do expect this to change. Expect them to give her either some sort of buster up if she's buster, or maybe even arts up if she's arts. And you might be thinking, well, why would she be arts? And the reason for that would be because if you actually go back and look at the original Tiamat as a beast in mobile here, not only do you see the same deck, but you also start to see somewhat similar abilities here, where you've got debuff resistance, buff success rate down, and healing received down, as well as sealing of NP, reducing their attack. So she is predominantly a debilitator in this form as well. And then you get to the NP, and I know most of this stuff is just data mined, but hey, it is showing up arts. But I do think it's quite interesting because it is AoE, and it apparently deals buff block status. So that is something I think to keep in mind, that she could be more along those lines. Because again, as you start to look at her arcade Noble Phantasm, and do keep in mind, arcade is probably going to be truer to form because it's the larva form as opposed to actual Mama Tiamat, but still, I won't be surprised to see them maybe take some inspiration from the original Tiamat, simply because that is what Larva did. Larva took a lot of that inspiration from the original, and it's pretty clear. But obviously some things were changed. So I don't think it's crazy to assume that she might be some sort of hybrid of both of them, as she's now come back here into mobile, getting her own unique form here. Similarly, again, we have the ability to remove her own debuffs activating before her Noble Phantasm. That's actually a really strong capability. We actually see that a lot with like Castoria, where you're using her NP not just to protect the party, but also to cleanse it. She's not going to have to worry about any sort of debuff on her, because she is going to have that cleanse before damage goes out if they bring her in like that. And that's a cool thing, I think, because that'll just sort of negate a lot of challenge mechanics that could be used against her. The one problem with this sort of approach, and we see it with Castoria too, is anything like a stun or an NP seal cannot be cleansed by this, because you can't even select the NP in order to get the cleanse. And that's just more of a like logistical issue, a rule issue in the game. But certainly anything other than that, anything that would maybe lower her damage output or somehow debilitate her other than incapacitation or sealing her, you could definitely take care of. And so that would be a really, really good thing for her to have. Again, then she deals damage to all enemies, and she increases her own buster performance for 30 seconds. Now, this may turn into a multi-turn buster buff, so I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to turn her into some sort of looper. And again, I think even if they don't give her an insane amount of charge or something like that, as long as she has some charge in her kit, as long as she has even 10%, you would at least be able to 3-turn with her relatively easy. So this is an interesting thing to me to see how she might be more of this sort of challenge style of unit. But I think one of the big things that I'm seeing that's missing here is she doesn't have that hard survival. And well, yeah, she is an alter ego, so a lot of units are just going to be neutral against her. She's not really going to have anything to be able to stay up necessarily during a Noble Phantasm unless they add something like that to one of her skills, which they easily could. Now, looking at her passives here, you guys can see she has Authority of the BC, which is crit damage, Independent Manifestation, which is even more crit damage, as well as Mental Debuff Resistance and Instant Kill Resistance. Then she gets Goddess Essence EX for some flat damage added through Divinity here, as well as Debuff Resistance. Again, it's a whopping 30% there for the EX version, but keep in mind, it's arcade. And then she gets Infantile Regression, which gives her 2.5% gauge every 10 seconds. Now, this reminds me quite a bit of, sort of like the Avenger passive where they end up getting charge per turn. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that happen with her as well. She just might get her own unique spin on it. So that would be another interesting thing that I think they could do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't really know how this one's going to turn out. But if I were a betting man, I would bet that she's probably going to be a Buster AoE, and she is probably going to have some level of challenge specialization in her kit. I also won't be surprised to see her get some sort of niche damage, because that is all the rage nowadays, and it's something that I think really just sort of can help out a unit's performance, where maybe they're not the best unit for damage, maybe they're not the best unit for challenges and survival, but when you give them that niche, they have some level of node type that they just really excel at. And so it allows them to kind of stand out from the pack in those scenarios, and it allows them to not just have this constant argument of, X unit is better than them, Y unit is also better than them. Instead, you get to be able to say like, okay, but in Z situation, I get to basically take this unit because this unit just ends up being stronger. But again, you're not going to care anyways. You're only going to care whether or not you like Tiamat for most people's cases. So again, I do think it'll be quite interesting. And the one thing I also see here too, kind of lending me to this assertion, is she's a lot lower on the attack power than she is on the HP side of things, indicating that they really wanted her to be kind of shifted towards the HP amount. But again, it is PvP, so maybe we shouldn't read into that too much. But I think it's a very interesting consideration nonetheless. So I expect her to be some sort of new type of basically AoE Buster alter ego, which again, we do have units like, say, Okitan out there, but Okitan really is more of a conventional farmer. She's got that charge. She does have a hard survival skill in there, but I think she's more going to be your unit for 3 turning and stuff like that, whereas Larva Tiamat might be that unit that's really good in Servant Gauntlets, really good at locking the enemies down and sort of making it hard for the enemy to do whatever it wants to do, doubly so to her. So that could be a really intriguing setup that I think they could do with her. But let me know what you guys think they're going to do with Larva Tiamat. I'll be curious to read your responses, and also let me know if you're going to roll. I'll see you guys for the next video. Have a good one.